Welcome back. We're looking at data exploration today, and it's just within the context of the business analytics process. The first step is, of course, to understand the business problem, and then to understand the way in which we might want to use analytics to help either solve or inform the business problem. After we understand the problem, this next step is to prepare for modeling, and it's really the most time-consuming step in the process, and you can see the types of tasks that must be done in preparing the data so that we can do the modeling and the rest of the steps. The data we're going to use today comes from the sample data file within JMP. You go to the help and the sample data, then different ways of navigating to that sample data. In this case, it's going to be the equity data set. Equity data set, look at the context of what's going on here. We've got some historical data on bank customers, and we want to be able to determine if a customer is a good or bad credit risk, where within the data set the data variable bad is coded as 0 if the customer was a good risk, 1 if it's bad. And then the potential variables can be seen here that we're looking at. So we're going to first look at exploring one variable at a time. A few different ways of doing that. There's something called the column viewer in JMP, which is columns off the main menu and then column viewer, and also the analyze distribution, analyze and then distribution. We're doing this because we want to understand the nature and the characteristic of each variable, and to think about how it could be potentially useful in solving this business problem. The very first step, especially if we're just starting to look at this data, is to look at each variable and make sure that it's classified correctly. That is it a continuous variable or a categorical variable? And to change that classification if it's not correct before we get started. Let's look at, for continuous variables, what we might be looking at as we look at those. For continuous variable, again, getting to it through analyze and distribution. Some of the main tools that we have are looking at the histogram and the summary statistics. Histogram, looking at the shape. Does it follow some recognizable distribution? Does that tell us something about it? The skewness, and if there are outliers, and we'll look at an example in just a minute. And then the summary statistics, what is the mean and standard deviation for this data? And if it's a categorical variable, maybe looking at a bar chart and the number of levels of that categorical variable, and then the percent or the frequencies within each level. So as an example from that equity data set is selected these columns, and so from that we can click on, if you do column and column viewer, you get this input screen. From that you can select the columns, which you see shown here, select show summary, and then this is the default representation. And so for every variable that we decide to include in that column viewer, it gives us the number of observations, the number of missing values, and we can already notice that for this variable there's sort of a substantial number, looks maybe 10% are missing. And then if it's continuous, then we see min, max, mean, and standard deviation. But if it's categorical, again see the number of observations and missing values, but then the number of categories. So just selecting two of those, one continuous and one categorical. From the categorical here, this has to be the response variable. Remember, zeros were a good risk, 1 were bad risk, and we can see that about 20% of the values, so we got two levels, about 20% of those rows show observations that were bad risk, no missing values, two levels. For the continuous variable, we see this histogram, quantiles and summary statistics with the mean and standard deviation. And then for the histogram, we're seeing a box and whisker, and then these lines are representing fences, and beyond that fence is something that would be considered an outlier. It's outside what's called the 1.5 times the interquartile range. And so all these observations here are outside that fence, and you can see the skewness of this data. So for the bad, we talk about the fact that there's no missing variables. We have two levels. And then for the lone, observing the characteristics there. A very neat feature within JMP is that with these analyzed distribution and looking at these variables, if you select a level or some observations within a continuous, then we see how those correspond to the other variables. And essentially what we're clicking on are rows within the data table, and then it's highlighting those same rows in the other variables, and we can see the relationship then of how the good risk, how those observations are distributed across loan and mortgage due. Two other examples. So we have a number of job categories here, and we can see that we've got 6 levels of this job category, and these 6 levels, 2 of these are pretty small, and so we might think about maybe combining these or looking at reducing the number of levels in this categorical variable. And then this continuous variable, we can see that it has 500 or 5,445 rows, and if we recall that there were 5960 total rows, then we got some missing values here. We can see the average 8.9. The values range from 0 up to 42, and there's a lot of those values. If we look into the data file, we'll see are zeros. So there's definitely some issues here, these outliers here, the skewness, and so it makes us wonder about what's going on with this variable and whether it might be useful. We'll stop there for the one variable and come back and pick up the two variable.